Good morning. It's still early in the morning. Good morning.
Morning.
Thank you. So let me echo the sentiments expressed earlier and both congratulate the society as well as thank them for having us over. I also want to thank the Lee family for making this possible. It's always nice to come back to Hong Kong. I've been coming here for the last 11 years or so to work with my friends and colleagues at the Hong Kong University in the School of Public Health. Professor Lam is here, my longtime collaborator. So it's nice to be here and offer you my pebbles of wisdom, so to speak, around ICTs. So this issue keeps coming up. What information and communication technologies can do to a family, or what a family can do to ICTs. So the two conflicting oppositional questions that seem to animate the debate here, right? So is the adoption and use of information and communication technologies of all kinds, whether it is social media, whether it is smartphones or internet, whatever it is that adoption and use influenced by existing structure of the family and the existing culture in the family, the existing dynamics in the family, or are the technologies so fundamentally different that they change the dynamics in the family, they change the communication in the family, they change the structure of the family, right? So this is the these are the two kind of oppositional questions that seem to drive this debate. So I have to disabuse of the notion that I will have an answer for it. I don't, because the causal assumptions that are made are really questionable. It's a sort of a reciprocal relationship. We looked at the evidence quite a bit, and what I want to do is really share some of what we have learned, both in global context, globally as well as locally, right? So the data are very clear. In fact, they keep, every time I put these data together, they get outdated because the penetration of these technologies of ICTs is moving at a very fast clip. So globally, about 5 billion people have mobile devices of some kind or other, and about half of them are smartphones. But the growth itself is unequal, depending upon two significant factors: age and socioeconomic status. So I will share some of these data with you. So in terms of different kinds of mobile devices, as well as internet and social media, certainly much more common in advanced economies compared to what are called as emerging economies, whether in terms of ownership of cell phones or owning smartphones. You can see from the data here that they are much more prevalent in more advanced countries, the high-income countries and even middle-income countries. At the same time, I must also say that the emerging economies are not standing still. In fact, some of the most exciting developments and adoption and innovations in terms of usage are taking place in these so-called emerging economies in the way, because I don't think they have the legacy problems that the advanced countries have, as a result of which the innovation in terms of usage is taking place in these countries in a very rapid way. Social media use is also increasing. If you look at, it depends on how you define social media, depending on the country, whether it is WhatsApp, whether it's WeChat, whether it is Facebook or LinkedIn, and each of these has very different functionalities, as you know. But in general, in most advanced economies or industrialized countries, it has increased quite a bit, but there is a large variation. And this variation is of two kinds. The variation is both in terms of the economic development of the countries, but also within the country there is a tremendous variation in terms of income and education and even geography in some cases, right? But across all economies, younger people, people from a higher socioeconomic position, whether it is education or income, are generally much more digitally connected, what we call as a digital inequalities. But it's also important to know that the way to adopt and use the technologies is also influenced by socioeconomic position, what we have been calling as communication inequalities. Younger people continue to drive the adoption of smartphones, right? So you take any economy, and I know you all can read the numbers here. That is a joke. But the trends should be clear from anywhere, right? The point of this is that compared to the older people, in terms of age, younger people are much more likely to adopt these technologies, not only in advanced economies, but also in emerging economies. What does it suggest? These data have some significant implications. What it is saying, what they are saying, the data are saying is, we will have an entire cohort of people, say 5, 10, 15 years from now, who will not know life without smartphones, right? That is a very significant issue. In fact, most of them don't know what a typewriter is. When I mention this in my class, they say, oh, we saw it in the movies, right? So they don't have any clue of what these previous technologies are and how life is like without internet or other kinds of technologies. But now we will have an entire cohort of people who will be now so used to being online or always online, as they say, using a variety of these devices, right? That has some significant implications in the way they deal with people, right? So from this global picture, we can look at Hong Kong. Thanks to my colleagues and collaborators, we have some very interesting data from Hong Kong also. Hong Kong is possibly one of the most digitally connected places in the world. As you can see, these are from the census data. About 90%, 87% use the internet. 98% have use smartphones to connect to the internet. And you can take, in fact, even as we put this data together, I'm sure they're outdated because every month there are tremendous changes taking place in terms of adoption of these technologies, right? So, thanks to the Family Health Information National Trend Survey coming out of the School of Public Health at the University of Hong Kong, we also have some good idea on how they're being used. And the kinds of, not only the kinds of devices that are being used, but what kind of social media are being used by people. Again, whether it's WeChat or Facebook or WhatsApp, WhatsApp has, I don't know, if you think about it, it has changed the way we interact in a way that we have not anticipated in many ways. And so these different kinds of social media have, of course, impact on the way families interact. And I will share some data with you shortly, right? So, given this penetration, of course, people are worried about it, right? So, the previous speaker talked about, how families are concerned about information and communications technologies. Professor Shuck also talked about it. We are all worried. Okay, so given all this penetration, given all this virtual ubiquity of these technologies, what is the likely impact, right? So there are certain popular conceptions that people have or hold about these technologies. These conceptions are important, whether they are fact-based or not. It is immaterial because people's policy support, people's policy preferences are influenced by these conceptions, right? So let us look at some of these, what people think about it. I have put together a few of these. I won't go through all of them, but a couple of them which are indicative of the kind of struggles we are having with these technologies within the family context. One of them says, mobile phones and social media have really led to the spread of hatred and tribalism. Another issue about the family is cheating, which leads to home breakage and divorce. people just don't trust each other, right? So that's one of the conceptions. The continuing thread, irrespective of where you are in the world, right? And these are global data. The continuing thread is about vulnerable population, which is children, right? Children usually play with the gadgets the most and are exposed to radiation and experiencing seizures. That's what I heard, right? That's one of the family members saying that, right? Also, instead of playing outside, they are busy with the gadgets. They are no longer able to socialize with other kids. I'm sure a lot of us can relate to these kinds of sentiments, right? Or you should be the one limiting your child. There is a question of agency here. It's up to you to make ways to be able to limit the problems that you encounter. That's why even if my child is very interested with gadgets, he's essentially consistently in the honor rolls, I make limitations. So there is sense of, we can control this. In certain families, there is controlling of the usage of it. But there is also a lot of distraction. In fact, I just read in the papers this morning that Boston Legislature House has passed a legislation, which will pay or fine drivers who are driving with their cell phone or driving while talking on their cell phones. So this is a distracted driving is an issue, but distracted living is an issue with these technologies. If you think about it, in fact, because one of them said, because I was so busy texting my client, my rice got overcooked. So, so the issue is this kind of a overall, confidence in ourselves about multitasking, doing many different types of things, and somehow we assume that we are so strong, we are so good that we can do some number of things at the same time without damaging ourselves, right? And there is this wonderful study that came out of Charles Schwab, which says half of the millennials say social media drives them to spend money that they don't have, right? Again, there is a conception that they are being influenced, they are being subjected to outside external influences to do to have behaviors that they did not have previously. And it's the same, whether it is emerging economies or advanced economies, there continue to be an issue of concern. At the same time, the other trend, which is very interesting, is people think that they can use smartphones much better and they have control over it compared to other people, right? So I can do a much better job of controlling myself. I'm so confident, but other people, I don't know, right? So this is what we call the third person effect, and you can see this coming up again and again about this media, right? So the other concern that keeps coming up is the notion of children. I think I already talked about it. The large percentage of, and these are global surveys. This is not just datum from one country, and percent of adults who say people should be very concerned about children being exposed to harmful or immoral content when using their mobile phones, or about increasing use of mobile phones having a bad influence on children. All of these remain a huge concern globally, right? So in summary, if you look at these data, and these are very empirical observations, what you are seeing is that there is this assumption that somehow smartphones and social media and other kinds of internet and other devices and in general affect family communications, family life information seeking or information sharing, certainly family cohesion, family conflict, and of course there is this consistent thread about addiction, right? So there is this lot of sentiment out there, and the question for us is, as those of us who are either in doing research or in applying this research to the work we do in the world, the question is, what is the nature of evidence? Do we have enough evidence, number one, that there are harmful effects or there are salutary effects of these media, number one. Number two, if there is such an evidence, what do we do about it, right? I think these are the questions that really concern us as we move forward with these things. So what we have done is we actually looked at the literature on family well-being, as well as drawing from the work we have been doing with our colleagues for more than 10 years here at Hong Kong University in the School of Public Health, right? So let me give you a couple of these examples and talk about them. I won't go through all of them. There is a large body of work. So one of them is how are families using ICTs? And the use of ICTs or information and communication technologies, are they associated with family well-being in Hong Kong, locally, right? So I want to share some Hong Kong data with you, and then step back a little bit and share some global work, right? So the Hong Kong Family Health Information National Trend Survey, I don't know how many of you are familiar with it. It's an amazing set of waves of surveys that have been done by Professor Lam and his team for almost 10 years now, I think, where they have been looking consistently at a number of things, but that include information and communication technologies, as well as family well-being, the well-being being the three aspects: family harmony, happiness, and health. This is one of the few surveys that actually explicitly connects both happiness and harmony with health. That is very unusual in many ways. And the key findings are very, very comforting in some ways, right? So there are varieties of methods people use to communicate, but face-to-face interaction still remains a dominant way. So if you are getting worried about, somehow ICT is replacing whatever we do in life, that is not necessarily empirically tenable, though we use other kinds of media, whether it is telephones or instant messaging, or as you were saying, WhatsApp or whatever. There is still there is a lot of connections, that are taking place, and maintenance of that relationship taking place through more conventional platforms or channels, right? And what is interesting is, if you look at the Hong Kong trends, certainly younger aged people, age matters, whether it is using in terms of phones or instant message or social media sites. Education matters and income matters. As I have said, all these things influence different ways of using ICTs. But what is interesting, I think, what is instructive in this data that came out of FHENS is face-to-face and telephone communications are more strongly associated with family well-being, right? So that still remains an important issue. And I'm using the word associated. I don't, it's not causal, right? This is a cross-sectional survey, but what it clearly says is, these conventional channels still matter. Maybe people think that the younger people in the audience may think it's outdated, but certainly from a family well-being perspective, it still matters, right? The FHENS also has been looking at how do people share information through video calls and other kinds of information, ICTs, and how is the sharing of this information related to family well-being. And it's very interesting, again, as a part of this is a 2016 survey where they interviewed more than 2,000 people, looking at how different families share family life information and how is it associated with well-being in terms of both harmony, happiness, and health. Again, it should not be surprising to you that the prevalence of the different methods remains face-to-face and instant messaging, while other kinds of ICTs matter, but not that much. But more critical, again, the trend of education and income, continue to influence what technologies people use. If you are younger and if you have higher schooling, you'll continue to use face-to-face instant messaging and social media sites or video calls in terms of higher education, if you have higher education. But again, the most critical finding is higher family well-being is associated with sharing family life information, especially through face-to-face and video calls. Yesterday we spent an hour and a half in the office of Professor Lamb talking about some of these findings. And if you think about videos, at one time you need to have a very sophisticated production house to develop videos. That's not the case anymore, right? Anybody, everybody is actually a producer. She or he can produce on their smartphones and upload, right? And they have stories about these things, right? So that, I think, is actually good news in terms of how that might promote family well-being, right? So from Hong Kong, I want to step back a little bit in the few minutes I have to talk about what does the literature say broadly, what are the studies saying about other dimensions of family. And again, I won't have time to cover all of them. There are not a lot of studies, which is surprising given the hubbub in the literature and how hubbub in the popular media and amongst all of us. We are worried so much about it. But if you look at the data itself, there are only roughly about 35 to 40 studies. Most of these studies are what we call as cross-sectional, which means they do surveys at one point in time, so you cannot make any causal attributions. You cannot say ICTs lead to better family well-being or worse family well-being because of the kind of studies that have been done. Very few are experiments. Most of them are self-reported surveys. In some surveys, they have gone a bit more sophisticated, where they actually do the self-reporting, but also ask people to maintain diaries so that they can document them. Just including our lab at Harvard, there are a few more studies that are going to come out pretty soon, where we actually use technology to track how much social media people are using. Those studies are not published yet, but they're going to come out pretty soon here. But based on what we have on these 35 or so papers, and some of them are reviews, some of them are studies, we can say that, in terms of family cohesion, the research is all over the board, so there is no single easy way to capture what the data tell us. But there are a couple of interesting lessons one can learn. One of them is that when parents' mobile device use, it might reduce family cohesion, but only when it impedes face-to-face interaction, right? So when face-to-face interaction is substituted, not supplemented, but substituted by mobile devices, then it could potentially reduce the bonding and the cohesion between a parent and a child, right? So when parents are using mobile devices while dealing with children, they are less likely to be sensitive and responsive to the children's needs. It also says it is in our hands. In some ways, parents have an agency, have control over these things. Smartphone use, again, in terms of parent-child interaction, distracted parents, smartphone use distracts parents from developing better, stronger social connections with their children when they spend that time together. This notion of spending time together is very critical. Hong Kong is, for example, one of the busiest societies. I have never seen a more hardworking people. And it is something for us to think about, because all of us are in this industrialized setup where we work all the time. And the question is, how much time does it leave for us to spend time together? So on the other hand, family cohesion, on the one side, the couples' relationships are actually strengthened. A lot of studies, some studies on online dating and online relational maintenance. In fact, and ICT certainly supplement and help in relational maintenance. At the same time, social media can promote social comparison, leading to poor relationships. Sometimes individuals within a dyad in a couple may engage in partner surveillance and experience what people are now calling digital jealousy. And certainly social media can provide opportunities for emotional and physical infidelity. Again, a couple of studies are talking about it, right? There is a lot of discussion about family cohesion across nations. I won't have time to go through all of them, but suffice it to say that, in fact, when you are geographically separated, information and communication technologies are particularly valuable in developing and maintaining that family relationships, whether it is in Spain, students studying elsewhere, immigrants in Europe, Romanian immigrants in Europe, Indian immigrants in the US, refugees in Australia. In all these cases, ICTs actually reinforce that family relationship, and they're much more helpful in maintaining those family bonds. There is very little systematic work on work-family conflict. It's a surprising thing, given everything we talk about work-family conflict. You know, ICTs do allow employees to work during family time, which causes problems, but not always. A lot of it depends upon the nature of work and what are the employer's expectations and demands. So a lot of it again goes back to the policies that were earlier discussed. If the employer himself or herself or the company is expecting the employee to spend more time at doing work at home, then that could lead to problems. So it's a question of the nature of the job itself, right? So in summary, use of ICTs is growing across the world, and there is increasing concern about family well-being and information communication technologies. Particularly, the concern is about how ICTs can influence and impact children as well as on the parent-child interaction. But they can be potentially useful. ICTs can be useful when they are working as a supplement but not as a substitute for regular interactions. This is a particularly critical issue. They are valuable particularly when families are geographically separated. They help in maintaining that relationship. There is very mixed evidence on work-family conflict. There seems to be some concern here, but we can't draw very good conclusions. One of the interventions that seem to be coming up, which seems to be effective, but we can't draw any conclusions right now, but it seems to be working, is the notion of maintaining some limits on screen times by everybody, not just one person in the family, but everybody maintaining a screen time. There is a very famous advertisement in the US, not famous, but it's run frequently by a cable company where the parent call children and everybody to come together and have dinner, and all of them come to the dinner table, but they're all busy, using their smartphones. And the mother actually has a switch in her smartphone, so she uses that switch and disconnects the entire family from Wi-Fi, much to the chagrin of the children as well as the partner. But, then they live happily ever after. They have a great dinner, So the point is, it is in our control in some ways, though the policies are very critical, I think, and the culture in which these are introduced are very critical, I think, So we need to think through how to do that. So let me thank again the Lee Family Foundation, the Hong Kong Jockey Club Charities Trust, which funded the group with Professor Lam, Dean Lang, and Secretary Chan, who are longtime collaborators with us, as well as Professor Kelvin Wang, who is also in the audience, with whom we have been working and generating some of these data. Thank you so much.